Our next guest is Baroness Helena Kennedy. She's a highly esteemed human rights lawyer who serves on a legal task force which is helping to build those cases in Ukraine. Thank you very much for being on the programme today. Can you just explain a bit about the task force, who is on it and what it is you're trying to do?
Thank you, Sophie. But you're very right in saying that these things take so much time because it's so important that the evidence is of a very high level and that you are pretty sure that you can pass some of the thresholds that are necessary, first for prosecution and then for hopefully convictions. This task force was set up at the behest of the Prosecutor General, who wanted to have some advice from lawyers beyond Ukraine, feeling that she has, of course, internationally qualified lawyers there too. But basically to have that input and discussion about what is most likely to be successful in the long term. It's very difficult, as your listeners will know. The United Nations and decisions at the United Nations inevitably, because of how it was organised back in the 40s after the Second World War, the 5 nations basically have the voting rights on anything substantial, like putting something before the International Court of Justice. And Russia is one of those nations, as is China. And both of those nations often exercise their veto to prevent actions being taken against, as they would see it, a sovereign nation, because of their concerns that this could have consequences for them and them too. So we're not expecting that Russia is going to give an agreement to any kind of inquiry or a tribunal or court. And so in those circumstances, one's presented with serious problems. How do you establish a tribunal without the consent of the parties who currently in international law basically ratify whether there should be a court hearing? And what is being looked at the moment are the alternatives to that. The International Criminal Court has already embarked upon an investigation, and that was voted for by a majority of the General Council of the United Nations, which can do that on a majority, and it was a substantial majority. That investigation is going on. We are assisting in that by making sure that evidence that comes via us finds its way to the International Criminal Court, but that it passes those thresholds, which are about being likely to produce a positive outcome, because otherwise, you're really in difficulties if you haven't got solid evidence. This is a case, though, where surprisingly there is going to be evidence fairly quickly and readily available because of the quantity of international journalists who are present, have gone into the country, CNN, Sky News. You've got a wonderful reporter there from Sky News. The BBC's present. Many of the international corporations, media corporations, are actually filming, interviewing people, and so you're getting evidence which will be immediately archived. You've also got people who themselves are taking evidence because they're using their iPhones in order to film things that they're seeing. That's more difficult because, of course, the allegation will be made by Russia that it's been interfered with and that it's not being properly processed. You've got to make sure that there isn't any contamination or editing or anything that could have in any way interfered with the probity of the evidence. So there are some problems with that. There are people on the ground from Human Rights Watch, from Amnesty International, from the UN itself, who are gathering evidence. So evidence is being gathered. It's about accumulating that, sifting it, and unfortunately, all of that takes an incredible amount of time. The big question just now for Ukraine is they would like something positive. They would like Russia to be put on the back foot by being told categorically that there is going to be a case brought in an international forum of some kind. Now, the Council of Europe could, for example, set up some sort of forum, as it did for Kosovo. A forum was set up, a tribunal for Sierra Leone, which did not involve, it wasn't set up in the traditional way. It wasn't at the International Court of Justice, but Charles Taylor was put on trial. So we're looking at all the other alternatives that there are to how you could bring to justice Russia and senior figures.
Okay. It's interesting you were saying there that already there is this evidence of the war crimes that are being committed in Ukraine. You've seen them, I've seen them, our viewers will have seen them whenever they turn on their TV screens or look at their phones. I guess my question is, we talk a lot about, we stand back and we talk a lot about, the process of gathering evidence. Is there anything in particular that has really shocked you to witness being carried out in Ukraine? On the programme, if I talk about my own experience, some of what people have told me about the treatment of women and girls, the rapes, the way these civilians are being treated is just absolutely devastating. Are there any examples that you can give of what you've seen?
Well, one of the things, Sophie, is that a change has taken place internationally in the recognition of rape as a weapon of war. And what that means is not that an instruction is given, but from the top to go out there and rape citizens, women and girls or anybody else. But it's about this sort of tacit permission that's given, the ways in which no one's brought to book or called into line or disciplined. And so that gives an immunity to soldiers on the ground. They know that this is permissible. And so what we've heard and evidence is being gathered is that serious offences of a grievous kind have been committed against citizens, against women and girls. That's a new thing in recognition and in investigating and making sure that it's properly reported. Now, the other thing is, here we have a situation of people who are in a bunker in those tunnels underneath the steel factory in Mariupol. And if Russia does not enable those people to get out and to give them free passage into freedom, then you're again talking about the commission of a war crime if they end up having to end their days in those tunnels. So there are many crimes. We've witnessed them on our news. Bombing residential areas, bombing hospitals and orphanages. The business of bombing the theatre, where it was quite clear that citizens, civilians were in hiding, the word children was plastered on the ground so that any aerial bombardment could see what they were dealing with, and yet they bombed that place to smithereens.
When you're talking about the those images that we've seen of the people sheltering in those tunnels underneath Mariupol, many civilians, lots of children there. We can see the images of them, certainly. We are out of time, but just quickly, I was wondering if I could get your take on how easy it would be to prosecute Vladimir Putin himself for a war crime.
That is always more difficult until you have victory by Ukraine and the aftermath of that. It's very difficult to bring leaders to justice. It was possible, you remember, with Milosevic. It has been possible with other leaders. And of course, after the Second World War, Nuremberg was created, and that was a tribunal, a court created by those who had been the victors in that war. And so I think that we're looking carefully at what the steps would have to be, but we're a long way from that.
Okay, thank you very much for being on the programme today. Helena Kennedy, really important voice there. Thank you.